30 minutes of power.
Welcome to 30 Minutes of Power, a podcast dedicated to educate, encourage, and inspire godly people to use their power to empower others. Join your hosts, Jori O'Neale and Nicole Salter, as they share powerful insights on how you can use your God-given talents and gifts to make a positive impact in the world.
You've just gone through a myriad of dialogue that I think each of those needs to be segmented and then digested, right? You talked about colonization, you talk about masking, you talked about spiritual formation. These are words that, as a human who's been doing the work, I get you. I'm right here with you. Like, we moving along. But I don't want it to be a stumbling block for humans who are still trying to wrap their brain around.
For sure.
Neurodivergence doesn't just mean autism. Yes. Because I've gotten that a lot. Right. And so I love this conversation. Like, I can eat this all day. Like, this is amazing.
I could talk about it all day.
I do want to slow it down and break it down, not too much, but enough in the 30 minutes for individuals who are trying to follow along. And so Corina's explaining, I think, for the most part, a lot of systems, a lot of systems of power, both in the church, outside of the church, cultural norms, societal norms, basically all the boxes. And in an effort to elevate oneself in our particular movement of churches, it is indicative that you fit a box. And if you don't fit a box, then you will not be accepted. And so the masking, it shows itself up in varying forms and ways. And I appreciate this conversation, because I had this conversation yesterday on a different podcast, and I was sharing about my experiences coming from predominantly Black neighborhood in Chicago and going into a classroom at St. John's University. And the number of masks I had to put on from the moment I woke up in my dorm room with two other white women, when I had never lived with a white person in my life. Not that that should be anything, but it is a thing, right? And I think us being mature enough to say out loud, like, you and I, we both are human. We both are women, but we were not raised in the same spaces, in the same ways. And so there are things that are normal to you that are not normal to me. And I think if we don't have that conversation about what is and is not normal, there can be a space where one of us at some point or the other will feel othered.
Yeah. I will say this, and I would love for us as a movement, as a community, to get away from using the term normal, because I explained, like, well, what is normal, right? I feel like people feel that all the time. Well, what is normal, right? I think there's a standard or expected way of doing and thinking about things. I think that more than anything, when it comes to that, like, neurotypical, right? It's functioning and thinking in a way that is in accordance with the dominant societal standards. That's why I really like that definition versus, like, you're either different or normal. It's like, no, we're all different. That's not what neurodiverse. It is talking about, though, what are the expectations? Things like, and if we're sticking within the origins of autism being the bulk of neurodiverse individuals, and I still think that's true. But if we're looking at it that way, it's like things like, look at me, and respect being communicated by eye contact. We want to talk about biblical standards of affection, right? Brotherly affection, and us not realizing how many different types of love there are. But you're so unloving, you won't give me a hug. I kid you not. I was at a singles conference, and it's always well-intentioned people. That's the hard thing about this too, and why I think it's pervasive in calling these things out, is because people are just so well-intentioned, and it does so much destructive harm, though, particularly when I'm talking about religion, passages are misinterpreted. It was a Romans 12:10 kind of a deal, right? And basically one sister was rebuking. I think they were trying to be gentle, but reality, it just came out very aggressive and harsh, and rebuking another sister who doesn't hug for a number of different reasons. Some of it's sensory, Some of it's just different things here, but definitely under the neurodiverse box in that sense. So she doesn't hug people at first. You have to become a safe, preferred individual before they can allow that. And even then it's hit or miss, right? That there are different ways of showing affection and fellowship and hospitality, right? We have that. And I'm not going to read it for the sake of time, but for those of you at home, I mean, you look up that Romans 12:10 scripture, and as we're having this conversation, I hope you go, oh, yeah, well, duh, that doesn't equal hugs. And yet our patternism, our blueprint hermeneutic background, if you're part of that, if those of you are part of a church that favors that hermeneutic, that Bible interpretation process, then you'll know, oh, why did we always equate be devoted to one another in love, in this brother, some of the versions say affection, right? Why did we translate that to hugs? When did we make those two of the same things? And now you have our neurodiverse population needing to mask or camouflage. And that's the other term, by the way, that you might hear me use, camouflaging. And it's exactly how it sounds, right? Like a chameleon. You're trying to portray a non-autistic or a or a neurotypical, I'll say it that way, but a neurotypical persona, right? You're trying to blend in, if you will. It's not just about painting a mask on your face or, pretending to be something you're not. You're really just there trying to blend in to the environment. And that one's, again, it is driven by the desire to fit in versus masking. That is about compensating. You are compensating for your difference by putting on a mask. They're trying to copy other people. Does that make sense? There is a slight distinction. Oh, are you muted? Am I muted?
No, you're fine. You're fine. When you initially mentioned that, there were so many emotions, I think, that came up for me. Because I think the layers of masking that are there and are not addressed. So as I was sharing before, I was sharing about my discomfort, my discomfort. Absolutely. It felt uncomfortable, unnormal, unnatural. It felt interesting. And there were times where I did feel othered, and it wasn't on purpose. No one was trying to make me feel othered, but in just existing, and then going from there to then going to a classroom where I am one of 2 Black people out of like 50 people. And then going to joining a church where there's a good mix of humans, right, for the most part. But now there's a different mask I have to put on, because before I had to put a Eurocentric mask on, less hood, less Black, less ghetto, less culture, and now I have to put on this other one, more refined, more spiritual, more holy, right? Like, and so I was sharing with her that I was shape-shifting so much that by the time I had my first kid, and now I have this new mask of mother. What is that? What is mom? What is that? I'm a wife. I'm a mom, like all the labels. And I was like, who am I? Because I left Chicago wearing a mask so that I wouldn't die, right? Like, I became a geeky nerd on purpose. So like, don't attack me. Don't look at me. I don't want to cause any attention. Like, I suffocated all the gifts, all the talents, everything in Chicago so that I could survive. I didn't want people looking at me. I didn't want people asking anything of me. I just wanted to exist in peace. And so when I left, and now I'm being asked to do the opposite. Oh, you have to show up to everything, and you have to use your gifts and speak up and be out of yourself. And if you're a naturally introverted person who has spent the first 20 years of your life purposely choosing to silence your voice, and now you're being forced to be the exact opposite, it's jarring emotionally. And then later, after you've done it for so long, where is the line? Where am I? And
Yeah.
where's the mask? And so that's where I found myself, which is part of my journey in therapy. Like once I started liking my husband, I was like, I like a boy. I don't know who I am, so I don't think it's fair or mature or wise to engage in a long-term relationship with a human if I have no idea who I am. Like I want two whole humans to come together, not fragments and pieces of who I think Jori is. And so I started going to therapy, and it was really journaling and prayer. Like after a couple of years, I was like, all right, therapist lady, I love you. You cool, you dope. I appreciate the safe space that you have created for me, but I'm gonna keep my money. And Jesus in my journal. We got this. No knock to therapy. I love therapy. Therapy, go there.
Yes.
But my season had ended. I might have another season in the future. I don't know. But my season at that moment had ended because I had tools now.
Yeah.
I had ways of being to help me figure out, stop, slow down, wait, breathe, pause. Who are you?
Yeah.
What do you want? Does this fit?
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting to now add this additional layer of normal, atypical, because it's all basically hiding, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even if it's for a good reason, right? Because some of the medication that my coworker shared that she takes is to mask her symptoms. Like she legit said it. And so I'm like, all right, why do you? And I asked her, I said, why do you mask? And she's like, if I didn't have to talk and I was at a cubicle or at a desk, I don't think I would care so much about my tics. But because I am in front of children, I think it's good if I can get through my lesson. And so I'm like, dag. And she shared some of the side effects from the medication that she takes and how it impacts certain choices that she has to make in terms of like reproductive health and all these things. But I'm like, dag, like in her case, her occupation will probably never be a safe space for her neurodivergence.
Yeah. Well, let's hope not. I mean, I think it's going to take either a long-term commitment or a drastic shift in government policies, procedures, even HR things for there to be certain protections for the environment to be supportive and safe. Say for somebody who has Tourette's, or even I think about those who stutter, although stuttering I don't think would go under neurodivergence, but Tourette's would. So I think, let me say this first. You mentioned about, getting a little emotional. And I think anybody who's ever had to camouflage, mask, assimilate, compensate, let me just put a statistic out there and add a little number validity and a number that'll validate why it's important to be in touch with that, the mourning and some of the grief and the stress and anxiety of this. And again, whether we're talking about this from a neurodiversity standpoint or maybe even racial, gender, I mean, you name it, anything that's within that realm. Here's a statistic from a 2018 article. It's by Cassidy Bradley et al. It says a majority of autistic adults, 72%, scored above the recommended psychiatric cutoff for suicide risk on this screener, essentially. And that's significantly higher than the general population, which is 33%. Okay, so we're talking 72% of autistic adults, according to the study, were on the cutoff for a suicide risk. Now, they go on to explain this. In autistic adults, non-suicidal self-injury, camouflaging, and a number of unmet supported needs significantly predicted suicidality. Think about the overlap of those things: non-suicidal self-injury, camouflaging, and a number of unmet support needs. Now, people don't realize this too. Non-suicidal self-injury, we can include within that now high-cost coping mechanisms like drinking, like even just like constantly being in a state of an altered state, whether it's, whatever drug of choice is on the market nowadays, right? That's shopping, that's poor eating. You think about the population diabetic, the overlap for some of these non-suicidal, self-injurious type behaviors. This isn't just, we're not just talking about autists, we're not just talking about those with ADHD or Tourette's or dyspraxia. We are literally talking about a society that not only rewards, but pushes out or accepts really drastically this neurotypical or atypical standard. For me, when I realized I was undiagnosed ADHD, and you've actually asked this a few times, so I'll land the plane. I know we're reaching that 30-minute mark. So for me, I did the research, Instagram Reels, TikToks. I actually didn't really watch many TikToks, but you know how they make its way to Instagram Reels, whatever. There were all these really funny, 1-minute videos of like, I'm ADHD, right? And then they fill in the blank. I'm like, why do I relate so hard? And I was evaluating students. My role in the school system was purely to evaluate and see if students met eligibility criteria. So when I started learning the neurodiversity movement wasn't about pathologizing. In fact, they actively fight against, this movement is actively against over pathologizing, overly seeking labels and diagnoses and DSM-5s and criteria cutoffs. And they're overly seeking to go against that validating the experience of a neurodiverse individual. So I've never been diagnosed with ADHD. I just know I am. And so I like to say I'm undiagnosed ADHD because the reality is I think it's important that people do get diagnosed when we get to label things, identify them. There's a power in that. And I would love to get tested. That's on my bucket list of things to get tested. I actually took one of those online IQ tests too, because some of the unhealthy habits of typical, and I say that typical, but like of many gifted students, I have things like harmful perfectionism, rigid thinking. And I also scored really high on the autism quotient screener. So like, there are just certain things about me that I'm like, I am constantly having to like double down and backtrack to see if the way I handled something, was it appropriate? Mm-hmm. And I think that when I realized like I do a lot and say a lot of cringy, inappropriate, awkward, whatever. Now, because I'm confident, and that's one of my strengths, I am insanely confident. I think I'm able to navigate that, and I come across as quirky and, oh, she's so quirky and look at how confident and cool she is. And if people think it's cool, then I'm cool, right? Like, but I'm definitely I have a certain strong personality that sometimes I think is influenced, not just because I'm confident, but because I do things differently and very assuredly so. Like there's an incredible assurance I have. Here's what I'll say this too. And again, for those of you listening and you're like, that's a lot of information, I don't even know what to do with it. Let me just give you just a few quick, I'm a 3-point sermon girl. It is what it is. I grew up where I grew up. I like my 3-point sermons. I would say 3 things that you can do. First one, and it's simple. Just find your friends. And I'm not saying go up to every single person who's neurodivergent, but go up to people and say, hey, I know you mentioned your ADHD. What's your life like? Like, tell me about your experience. And I think it's important for others to realize you've met one neurodivergent person, period. We're not all the same. There's not any, again, this is that pushback and over pathologizing. You think you have it all figured out because you figured out one ADHD person? No. One autistic person? No. It does not work that way. So be curious, be humble, and ask the questions. Ask people what their experience are. Ask how you've made them feel. And for those of you who are Christians, you need to rely on the Holy Spirit. I'm sorry, that is not some kind of a disclaimer. That is a foundational reminder that you need God to navigate these relationships and interactions, period. So if you are a God-fearing Jesus follower, pray for the Holy Spirit to teach you how to love somebody, how to help them in their spiritual formation, how to help them to grow in their faith in a way that doesn't cause them stress because you're forcing them to be neurotypical. And I'm talking about things like Acts 17:11, read your Bible, eagerly examine the scriptures every day. And we say, what do we equate that to? Actually, like passage reading. You look at other versions of Acts 17:11, and we have to understand that meditating on passages, on scriptures, that there are different ways of receiving the word, of learning. Once upon a time, your girl was all kinds of prideful and was like, you're not reading your Bible every day. You're reading some Joyce Meyer devotional book instead. That's not right. That's not who was I to say that? Who was I to say that they were not learning and soaking in biblical truths and faith-filled information from reading a devotional book, right? There are different ways of learning the Bible, different versions, modalities. And in our churches, we love the NIV. What about the other versions? What about the NIRV that puts things on a third grade reading level? I need that. But when we think about passages and the way to live it out too rigidly, we lack humility. Get humility. Have the conversations, get to know people as individuals. Don't over pathologize them. Just have the conversations, get to know them. I think with that, second thing, pray for that compassionate discernment to increase, that humble collaboration with the person, but also with other people, like the SLPs in your life, like the behavioral therapist in your life, like this. Like, be curious in not just with that individual, but with the other professionals and experts around you. And we're not all going to agree. And that's okay too. Be patient in the problem solving. That's my third thing. Increase your patience. Understand that to figure it out, even just with an individual, but even as an entire institution, if you're at your job, as an entire institution, go through that trial and error process with respect for people's agency. You're going to need to take your time with problem solving. You're going to be suffering for a long time trying to figure out what's the problem? What's the right way to go about it with neurodivergence in mind, with pushing back on some of these standards that are inappropriate. And we've got to be aware of how that's going to stress our neural. And I say this, for those of you like, yes, hurrah, be very aware. You're about to flip the script on a bunch of people who have figured out the neurotypical way. And I'm not even going to say they are neurotypical, although I'm sure you're going to have those people. But even those, and I will say this for myself, even those, and I'm a high masking individual, even for those who have high masked, I've figured it out within the church, especially. And I'm not even just, I'm just honing in on the church because that's what I was prepared to talk about. But for me, I kind of had the church figured out. Well, what do they want? What's the box? Perfect. Let me fit it. And I had it figured out. And the moment I realized I was diminishing and stressing myself out, trying to be something, I mean, one of the things was I considered suicide myself because the way that I was not female appropriate, if that makes sense. And so I thought, well, I am masculine. These are all things, the gifts, the talents, the things. Like, I think God made a mistake. I think this was a mistake. I was supposed to be a man. I don't think I'm a man. I don't feel like a man, but people are telling me that that's not appropriate for me as a woman. Maybe there's a mistake here. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here. And then realizing that I didn't want to do that. So I masked and I camouflaged really hard and I worked really hard to fit in, to be respected and praised because I fit in the box. And then when it flipped the script and I thought, okay, I think I'm ready to just be myself, but it was stressful in a different kind of way because I had figured out the system, but it was taking its toll. So I didn't really answer some of your other questions about me and how I came to be with all this and what I'm doing about it now, but I can just tell you, I try my best to slow things down enough. I think you mentioned with your therapy, like, okay, what do I need and how can I be a part of what's happening without twisting and contorting myself too much? There's a certain self-awareness that has to happen. And for those of us who are not quite, and I say us, but I find I'm getting better at regulating self-awareness, knowing your faith community, figuring out how to emotionally regulate, I think, so you can make honest decisions, safe decisions even. Anyways, that was a lot more than 3, but in my mind it was 3. Does that answer your question? I don't know. We're like trying to land the plane. I feel like I'm just opening up more can of worms.
It's good because there's editing. Because every time, so I was going to ask you with 2 things. You gave me 5, not really 3. I was gonna ask you 2 things that people could do, because this is a 30-minute drive. This is supposed to be what people listen to on their way to wherever, right? To empower them, to help them learn something, to help them be inspired, to be encouraged, to be curious, right? In that 30-minute drive. So I think it dope that you're already in a car, because like that lends itself to the podcast. But I want to thank you for your vulnerability and your openness and everything that you're sharing right now, especially that last bit. That's what I'm saying. Like every time you say something, I'm like, that should be a standalone episode. Like we should not be here. That could be the opening for like our 5th interview, because we're gonna probably be having these conversations for a while. Just because there's a lot of overlap, and a lot of common theme that I'm seeing in my story and in yours. And so if I experience these things and you experience these things, I'm going to take a silly guess that there are possibly other people who've experienced these things. In terms of masking the masculinity in you, I came from Chicago with a very hard, heavy masculine mask because I needed it to live. I thought femininity and everything that went around that was weak. And so I did not lean into those things. And coming into the church and being told, oh, you can't wear that. That looks weird. It looks strange. I'm like, weird, strange. It was fine. I went to class. I graduated high school just like this. Like, no, I got a scholarship. Nobody said I got a job. I dress like this to my job. Like what? But now here in this space that's supposed to be accepting and loving and gracious and merciful, you guys have a problem with this just because of your implications, which are all off and wrong. I'm like, okay, I don't know what I don't know. Yeah. And so masking it. And so now having 2 daughters and one who I'm seeing is like, I'm going to dress as eclectic as I desire to. And the other one is like, I'm just going to put on whatever I see. And if it's my brother's shirt, I don't care. Yeah. And me saying, shut up. Yeah. It's clean. It doesn't smell. And it's covering all the right places. Right. Just shut up and let her rock. Like that's me having to unlearn. So yeah, I would love to thank you, Corina. Thank you so much. Are we gonna chop it up? Because I wanna know how you unlearned a lot of those things, or if it's still an unlearning process. Because for me, it's still an unlearning process. Like there's always this voice in the back of my head as I'm preparing to like put on something. One is the voice of, girl, can you still fit this? Yeah. And the other one is, what will people assume of you if you wear this?
Now, spoiler alert, we don't unlearn, and that's actually not a healthy thing. It's all about metalinguistics and having the confidence to choose. Now that you understand, like you just said, right? You understand the context of decisions. You understand if you choose to do this or be this or act this way, this is what might happen. You get to choose. It's about understanding, being meta thinkers, and then choosing. You don't have to unlearn it. In fact, the fact that you learn that is to your benefit. Now it's having the confidence to choose, the confident and the discernment to choose which is the best route for you, safest route for you. But anyways, neither here nor there.
I like this. So now we're going to have 17 podcasts.
Cliffhanger. Oh no.
I think it's great. It's great. Like I said, I love being curious, and I love learning, and I love talking, and I love sharing knowledge. I'm in a season right now where I am encouraging myself and others, share what you know, share what you've been through. And that's how we got connected again. I was sharing what I knew in terms of book writing, and you were like, hey, I don't know much about that. Sign me up. And so here we are, and I'm super excited to have this be the first, was the premiere episode of our 22 episode series. Now it's gonna be 22. We just literally chop it up about all things. I don't know, whatever. We'll figure it out. It's gonna be great. But we're gonna make it 30 minutes. So this is gonna be 2 episodes today. People, part 1 and a part 2. And I like that. That's the flexibility. When you have your own joint, you just chop it up. It's great. It's fantastic. So I'm gonna end it twice, because twice is nice. because it's two of them now. Thank you again, Corina. Always a pleasure talking to you. Always joy seeing your beautiful face. This is Jori O'Neale, Corina Espejo, 30 Minutes of Power, TOP, saying be an empowered woman, using your power to empower others. Till next time, people. Peace.
Thank you for tuning in to 30 Minutes of Power. We hope you found today's episode informative and inspiring. To stay connected with us and continue the conversation, follow us on Instagram at 30 Minutes of Power or email us at azironsharpensiron@gmail.com. Don't forget to visit our website at azisi.org to learn more about our mission and how you can get involved. Remember, your power can make a difference in the world. Let's be folks out there using our power to empower others.
30 minutes of power.